Imagine like you throw a jar of stones and you just throw that jar of stones across an empty beach. That scattering of stones is basically what the Tongass is. It's this massive island archipelago, thousands of islands, and each of them have their own special characteristics and qualities. And so in studying it, you never know what you're gonna find. It's like you're an explorer every time you land on these islands. Very early on, this is where the center of logging occurred and where it continues to occur because it still has some of the largest trees found in the world.
Over decades, a thriving timber industry cut down acre after acre of the ancient rainforest that dominates southeast Alaska. But even so, today the Tongass remains by far the largest national forest in America. It is bigger than 10 states and part of the largest temperate rainforest left on Earth. It is also our country's largest natural carbon sink. Vast amounts of carbon dioxide are absorbed and stored by the forest, which means its long-term health is critical for combating global warming. But the trees in the Tongass forest are dying as the planet warms. And even as the forest visibly struggles to survive, there are those who want to see thousands more acres cut down. While President Trump is in office, extractive, industry-friendly politicians in Alaska are rushing to exempt the state from the roadless rule. Established in 2001, the roadless rule protects about a third of America's national forests from road construction and logging. Trump and his appointees have repeatedly expressed support for that effort and for increased logging in the Tongass. Much of what little is left of Alaska's old-growth forest, the largest and oldest trees, is in these roadless areas. This week, the Forest Service released a roadless rule environmental assessment that could potentially allow 285,000 acres of Tongass rainforest to be opened up to loggers next year. That's an area more than 12.5 times the size of Manhattan. In May, an expedition left the small fishing town of Point Baker on the northern edge of Prince of Wales, the largest island in southeast Alaska. Aboard were Elsa Sebastian, a Point Baker local, commercial fisherman and environmental activist, Mara Menahan, an artist, and Natalie Dawson, the executive director of Audubon, Alaska.
The intent of this project is to visit threatened places in the Tongass and on Prince of Wales Island that aren't often visited by people. We want to try to document those areas and also take the time to really hear the stories from the land that we can share to help people understand why this place is valuable. Prince of Wales is really the last place in southeast Alaska where there's large-scale timber harvest, and it's the last place in southeast Alaska where there's a mill that is still cutting trees in an industrial way. A lot of those trees are sent overseas. Areas in the Tongass that were still unroaded by logging were protected under the roadless rule. And now during the Trump administration, the roadless rule for Alaska, for the Tongass, is being redrafted. And it's likely that many of those lands that have been protected for the last 18 years will be once again open to logging. And so we could see the last of Prince of Wales old growth cut in the next 15 or 20 years. And so the time to get to know these places while they're still intact is now, and hopefully this project will help people realize what's at stake.
Since the 1990s, southeast Alaska's timber industry has been in steep decline. It accounts for less than 1% of the region's economy, just a few hundred jobs. Meanwhile, tourism and fishing, which represent over a quarter of the jobs in the region, are threatened by logging. What's more, making timber available for sale here costs the Forest Service an enormous amount of money every year. The forest is extremely remote, which makes the costs of logging greater than what is earned in sales. Over the last 20 years, the Forest Service lost nearly $600 million of taxpayer money chopping down trees in southeast Alaska. Opening up roadless areas to logging would likely cost taxpayers hundreds of millions more.
Folks have been documenting nature in lots of different ways for many years, and this tradition of natural history illustration specifically is kind of tied to scientific exploration, and it comes with a problematic colonial past, and I'm aware of that and thinking of that as someone that's working with the same set of tools that folks have carried around with them in the field for hundreds of years. In today's landscape, I think that style of painting and that tradition is still relevant, where we're saturated with images, and few people are doing things by hand in that way. And so the process to me is the part that feels most relevant. A single plant portrait can take me, all day looking at, a single specimen. I feel like maybe my role in the world is to sit slowly with things that other people don't look at, and especially places where things are threatened, and it is a way for me of saying goodbye sometimes to things that could be gone. And I just don't want these places to be logged before someone has a chance to say goodbye.
Earlier this year, Democratic congressmen introduced legislation that would codify the roadless rule, formally protecting in perpetuity the 60 million acres of roadless areas in America's national forests. But the bills have stalled. Meanwhile, the roadless rule protections have broad support in Alaska and around the country. One nationwide poll found that 3/4 of the country supports the rule, including more than 2/3 of Republicans. Nevertheless, the Forest Service and Alaska politicians are working to exempt the state from the roadless rule protections. The public has until mid-December to comment on or object to that plan. By next summer, President Trump's Secretary of Agriculture will make a decision on the roadless rule, potentially opening vast areas of Alaskan rainforest to logging.
In terms of climate change, we have to be thinking about adaptation and resilience. And adaptation comes with understanding how natural systems are going to change with time. So this is still a living, breathing laboratory. For scientists like myself and others, we can explore what those systems are going to do with change, and we have baseline information. The other piece of that is mitigation and resilience, and that as part of a climate change resilience strategy, we need places that are intact. We've always had those places where we've gone to build our own resilience and methods of adaptation. And so this place will also provide those values into the future if we choose to protect it.